with a walker is not great. So I'm like projecting to Saquon Barkley. Like that was not a fun experience. There has got to be some residual injury there. I had massive bruising over all of my feet well into the 4th week after my injury. So 2 weeks in, that's still rough. 2 weeks in is not at all like close to being healed. I didn't even have the ability to flex my feet at 2 weeks in.
Yeah. Yeah, so, Joe, that was remarkably accurate for what's actually going on with Saquon Barkley, and I have a little challenge. Okay. How long did it take you to recover till you were able to get back in the show again?
I was back dancing in the musical with light ankle braces on, I think 4.5 weeks after the injury.
4.5 weeks. Now, Saquon Barkley was given a 4 to 6 week timetable. So let's see if Saquon Barkley, professional athlete and starting running back for the New York Giants, can beat Joe Brown, starting redhead in all of our hearts. We just turned on the archiving, which means if you're listening to this after the broadcast, you will be starting here. That is our fault. So welcome to Touchdown with Hansen and Brown. Back to Saquon Barkley. He is actually, as Joe said, ahead of schedule. He was doing some light activity, which Joe also predicted. Nothing too much, but a little bit of running and a little bit of change of direction. Obviously, he needs a lot more before he's ready to play, but they're estimating he will be ahead of schedule. So we'll see if Saquon Barkley can beat Joe Brown. All right, more NFL news. Melvin Gordon will be playing this week. From everything his coach has said, it sounds like Melvin Gordon will have a starting position this week for the Chargers. Now, I think this goes without saying. If you have Melvin Gordon and he's a starting running back, you should play him. Great fantasy advice from David Hansen.
I'm shook.
But the more interesting thing is that this might be Austin Eckler's last week of high production. He'll still maybe be a flex play in the future, but this week, Melvin Gordon, it's his first game back. They may keep him to kind of a pitch count, may split carries, and maybe a little more committee than it will be in the future. So if you have Eckler, you could justify starting him if you need a running back. And they have opportunity for 2 running backs to do well. I mean, it's not impossible for both running backs to have good games. But if you have Melvin Gordon, I would suggest starting him. If you have Austin Eckler, this might be the last week you get true value out of him. And that's okay. We knew that would happen. Eventually, Melvin Gordon would come back. We didn't know it would be this soon, but that's what you knew when you drafted Austin Eckler in the 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe even 8th round. You had good value out of him for now, but unfortunately, some good things must come to an end. All right, enough about that. Let's talk about the previous week of football, Joe Brown. We just got through week 4, and we had some great play, some great weeks from some players, some awful weeks from some players, and some pretty average weeks from some players. Let's start with the really, really good. And the highest scoring player of the week goes to...
Wait, I think I know this one. No, it wasn't Mike Evans this week. That was last week.
Same football team.
Oh, okay. Was it... oh, shoot. I don't even know any other receivers on the Buccaneers, but I remember seeing someone get like 45 points.
That's A-okay. It's Chris Godwin, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Someone going into this season who we knew would be number 2 behind Mike Evans, but had high hopes for going into the season that he would break out. And I think it's official to say he has officially broken out. Chris Godwin, 41.2 fantasy points this week. But the even bigger surprise is that Tampa Bay's offense looked amazing against the Los Angeles Rams. They looked superb. They were up 21-0 early in this game. Granted, part of that had to do from some spectacular defense play as well, which we were not expecting out of Tampa Bay either. But the offense finally looked like it was clicking. Jameis Winston, 29.3 fantasy points. Even better, 7 passing touchdowns in the past 2 games. Jameis Winston, who started out as kind of a dud earlier this season, is playing very, very well. Now, we know Jameis Winston is a little bit boomer bust. But this is not a team I expected him to boom against. And I have high hopes for Jameis Winston for the rest of the season. There will still be weeks where he gets you very little fantasy points, or maybe he throws 4, 5, 10 interceptions. Who knows? It's Jameis Winston. But it looks like this offense has finally found its footing, which makes me believe, going back to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, that it's possible to have 2 wide receiver ones on the same team. Kind of like you got out of Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen a couple of years ago when the Vikings were throwing way too many passes.
Or Chris Edelman and Rob Gronkowski, if you want to. Why did I say Chris? I mean Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski, if you want to count Gronkowski as a receiver.
From the New England Patriots. I would. That's a good point. Mike Evans, despite being behind Chris Godwin, obviously in fantasy points, still had a great day. 18.9 points. So going forward, these 2 players are some that I think are set it and forget it. I think Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are matchup proof. There will be some days where they don't play as well, where they don't have as good of fantasy games, but that's all right. With the 2 of them, until we see... It's hard to say that Jameis Winston will be consistent every week, but unless a pattern starts to develop where Jameis Winston goes back to not playing well again, and then if Jameis Winston doesn't play well, obviously there will be less points for the wide receivers to get, I would say you should have no problem starting Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Joe, as a Mike Evans owner, how excited or nervous are you right now after seeing Chris Godwin and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers bust out this week?
I would say I'm a little concerned. You never want your number 1 wide receiver to be splitting time with someone. And yet, Chris Evans' production was not horrible regardless. He had a great week. So, I would say that I don't think Godwin is the pick over Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans is still the number 1 wide receiver on that team. And as far as production goes, he's still a set-it-and-forget-it player. You're not going to not play Mike Evans. He's going to have good production regardless. So he might not be doing as well as you would have hoped for, but I'm not too concerned that his production is going to drop off.
Otherwise, let's talk about something I never thought I would say. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay backfield, because they actually also were productive in fantasy. It's kind of weird. That's kind of weird saying. You usually don't want to have any running backs from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on your roster, but right now there is one running back you want to have, and it is not Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber had an all-right week, but honestly, he's an all-right running back. It's the kind of running back you would typically expect out of Tampa Bay. The running back you wouldn't typically expect out of Tampa Bay is Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones had a great week this week, and going forward, it'll be interesting to see whether or not he takes the starting role from Peyton Barber. I believe he had more carries this week. I will verify that in a second. But I am excited that Ronald Jones is playing well and that Tampa Bay can have an actual running game. That gives them more offensive options, giving Winston more time to, or more chances to throw maybe, or more protection while throwing, since they won't be expecting him to throw every single time. It helps the receivers because neither of the running backs are vulturing too many catches, but they're also, like I said before, giving Jameis Winston more opportunities maybe to throw, maybe keeping the drives alive. Either way, Ronald Jones is not a guy I'm comfortable starting yet, but he is an interesting guy going forward. The worst case scenario is that it becomes a running back by committee and neither of them bust out, but that's why he's a good person to keep on your bench for right now to see if that goes anywhere. There was one disappointment, however, on Tampa Bay's side of the ball, and that is the constant disappointment that is O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard, in a game where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers scored 55 points, in a game where Jameis Winston threw 385 yards, he had 6.3 fantasy points. 3 catches for 33 yards. What do you do? What do you do with O.J. Howard? He's a tight end, which means he's in a very limited position where you can find good players. He's on a very good offense, and yet, despite when they're producing well, he is not producing well. The other tight end for Tampa Bay, Cameron Brate, had a touchdown, had the same amount of catches, and had a touchdown. It's just very concerning to me, Joe.
I would just be concerned with the idea of playing Howard in general, just depending on what league you're in. There are probably better options. Will Dissly is only rostered in less than 75% of leagues, and he's the 6th ranked tight end in the entire league. And he looks like he's Russell Wilson's number 1 target moving forward. So if he's like lying around on your waiver wire, pick him up. Tyler Eifert's the 24th ranked tight end in the league. I mean, he's not amazing, but I would say he definitely has a higher ceiling than Howard. Jimmy Graham is only rostered in 55% of leagues, and he's back. He's a veteran tight end. He's got a great quarterback. He put up 18 points last week. There are definitely options probably sitting on your waiver wire that are better than the Tampa Bay tight end.
Yes, unfortunately, O.J. Howard has not been playing super well. However, while we do advise picking up another tight end, and maybe, depending on the matchup, starting that tight end, I wouldn't drop O.J. Howard. I know he's been disappointing, but if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense is doing well, eventually he has to do well, right? I mean, he's just too talented of a player to have this abysmal of weeks every single week. So far, he's been proving me wrong, but I do think it will get better for O.J. Howard. Despite me saying that, however, I am not comfortable starting him. I might have to start him just because there aren't that many options for tight end, but I'm not happy about it if I have him on my roster. Let's talk about the other side of that game. A game that was a total upset. Everyone expected most people expected the Rams to win that game, but the Rams did not win. Yet they still had a pretty good day fantasy-wise. Let's start with their quarterback, Jared Goff. Jared Goff coming into the season seemed like a low-end QB1, someone who may be a sleeper pick, might end up being drafted as a 10th or 9th, 10th, 11th quarterback, but might get top 5 production. And so far, he has not lived up to that. We thought maybe he'll have a great game today. Or not today, but Sunday. It was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whose defense we did not expect to perform as well as they did. And it was at home, and Jared Goff typically plays a lot better at home than he does anywhere else. Despite that, Jared Goff, well, actually, in favor of that, Jared Goff threw for 517 yards. 517! He needed to do that because Tampa Bay was up by so much. But that's still incredible for a quarterback. You would think that would produce a lot of fantasy points. And that is where you would be wrong. He only produced 20.7 fantasy points, even though he threw for 2 touchdowns. Why is that? Well, that's because he turned over the ball 4 times, 3 interceptions, and 1 fumble. Oof. Jared Goff is not someone who typically has that turnover rate in previous seasons, and yet despite that, this is the first game where he's thrown over 300 yards, but it is the 4th consecutive game where he's had at least 1 turnover. Jared Goff is a confusing player. It's for a very good offense in the LA Rams. He's a good quarterback. He led his team to the Super Bowl, and yet he just is not performing well in fantasy this year. If you have Jared Goff, I'm hoping that you have a second option that you can switch in between and just do it matchup dependent on who you think will have a better day. 20.7 points is not horrible in fantasy, but in a game where you throw 517 yards, you would hope for a little better. There are probably other quarterbacks that you could exchange in and out for him week by week, but it is a little bit concerning if you're a Jared Goff owner that he's not lived up to your expectations. Joe, if you have Jared Goff on your roster right now, and you have a quarterback, let's go with the example that you don't have another quarterback right now. Jared Goff is the only quarterback you have rostered. Are you dropping one of your players to pick up another quarterback?
Probably. Now, this depends on the orientation of your team. A lot of people are running large teams, a lot of players you're setting matchup by matchup. But if you're the kind of player that's got like your first 3 round picks that are big on your team and like just a lot of other players that just aren't really doing much, 100% it's always worth it to drop it, try and pick up a second player. I had 3 tight ends on my team for a while just because I had the extra space and I was trying to weed them out, and then eventually I dropped the other ones. You really want to test the waters with these because there are some quarterbacks that seem to be breaking out this year. For some reason, Jacoby Brissett is still not rostered in a lot of leagues, despite the fact that he might be one of the most consistent quarterbacks this year. And he definitely
Agreed.
ranked top 1 in fantasy points. So if you're looking for someone that doesn't have as much of a bust chance, Jacoby Brissett's a solid pickup. If he's not on your waiver wire, there are other quarterbacks you could pick up for potential. Gardner Minshew hasn't really done too well this year, but I think there's definitely potential there as he starts to settle into his own and learn the offense. So I would say that there are options other than Jared Goff. And that's not to say Jared Goff isn't potentially the man to go with if he shapes out his season. But it's always nice to have a safety option.
Joe, do you think Jared Goff, who is currently Jared Goff is currently position rank 18 as quarterback. Do you think he will end up as a top 12 quarterback this year?
I would very much hope that he does. He's got one of the best offenses in the league, and he's a great quarterback. If you're talking about him throwing ridiculous yardage in any given game, and the reason why he's not scoring well is because of mistakes, that's the kind of stuff that's going to get shaped up. And it's going to get shaped up because we're talking about a professional here. He can't allow himself to continue making those kind of mistakes. He can't continue throwing 3 interceptions a game. That's going to start to weigh on the Rams upstairs, whether or not this quarterback's really the right choice for the continuation of their team. And that seems like an extreme situation, but it's something that's got to be going through Jared Goff's mind. He can't keep playing like this. So if he focuses in, shapes up, talent-wise, ability-wise, and with the offense that he has, he should be a top 12 running back or top 12 quarterback in the league.
I agree with you. All right. I also hope the rest of his team shapes up, and there's one player that has kind of been shaping up, and that is Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley started the year abysmally. He was a guy who was having kind of a pitch count. He was having his touchdowns vultured by the backup running back, Malcolm Brown. And all of a sudden, he just had a very good game. Now, it was his worst game rushing yards wise. He only had 16 yards rushing. But I chalked that up to it being a game where they were down 21-0 early, so rushing wasn't necessarily an option. Despite that, he had 2 touchdowns rushing, so of those 16 yards, 2 of them turned to be touchdowns, and he had 7 catches for 54 yards. The pass-catching Todd Gurley is kind of more the Todd Gurley we're used to, and that's what excites me. Now, I'm still a little trepidatious of Todd Gurley. Obviously, he's been a little shaky so far this year. His weeks have been 11.1, 15.7, 4.3, and then finally 26 this past week. It's been a first-round pick, maybe early second-round pick. You would hope more out of him, but I think more does come from him. So that begs the question, should you sell high or should you buy low on Todd Gurley? Do you think he's going to get better or do you think he's going to get worse? And I don't think you should do either. Because if you're trying to sell him, people aren't going to offer you what value he could go as. They could give you 2 players for 1, but still there's very rare situations where you're going to get Todd Gurley's value in a trade. And on the opposite side, you could send an offer, but I feel like you'd be giving up too much for the risk that comes with Todd Gurley if you're going to try to trade for Todd Gurley. So right now, if you have Todd Gurley, I would hold on to him. I think better days are ahead, and I think Joe is right. The Rams offense has to start figuring themselves out, and I think a loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is a good wake-up call.
I just would have loved to be in the locker room after that one. I'm sure the coach really laid into him.
Oh, yeah.
There is one player on the LA Rams that is always matchup proof, and that is Greg the Leg Zuerlein.
Greg the Leg!
In any given game, we are talking about a kicker that somehow always has the opportunity to put a couple field goals through the uprights, and especially when the team is doing poorly, that just sets up the kicker for more awesome kicking situations. And Greg the Leg does not miss. He is still the number 2 ranked kicker in the league, and he put up 13 points in the loss against Tampa Bay. He is matchup proof. If you are looking for a solid kicker, Greg the Leg is always the draft option. He has proved that year after year.
Joe Brown is our resident kicker expert. He knows everything you need to know about the kickers. And Joe is right. Greg the Leg is the man. Rarely ever misses, has an incredible leg, a mega leg behind him. Yeah, you're happy if you're a Greg Zerlin owner right now. Also, you might be happy if you own some of the wide receivers on the Rams. It's a very interesting situation. They have 3 really good wide receivers. All 3 of them get plenty of catches throughout the game. In this game, where Jared Goff threw 517 yards, we have Robert Woods, who caught 13 passes for 164 yards. You have Brandon Cooks, who had no touchdowns, but 6 catches for 71 yards. And you have Cooper Kupp, who got 1 touchdown and 9 catches for 121 yards. However, every game, Jared Goff will not be throwing for over 500 yards. So going forward, from what we saw from this game and previous games, it's important to draw a distinction on which wide receiver you want to have from the Rams. And I think we know with the Rams that there's going to be days where one of them does really well and one of them doesn't do as well. But who do we think, in general, will do the best? And for me, number 1 is Cooper Kupp. The reason I say that is because Cooper Kupp has gotten volume every game. He is an incredibly talented and young wide receiver, but most importantly, he is an end zone target for Jared Goff. Jared Goff likes to throw to Cooper Kupp in the end zone. He threw some to his tight end recently. Still not a viable starting tight end just because he's caught 1 or 2 touchdowns. But Jared Goff likes to hit Cooper Kupp in the end zone. So if I had to pick one wide receiver right now to take from the Rams, that's who I would take, considering his steady volume and his high chance for touchdowns. My number 2 would be Robert Woods. Robert Woods kind of seems to be the man they have first on their depth chart, seems to get a lot of the targets. He's a little bit boomer bust, but I feel like there's enough of a floor there that I would take him over Brandon Cooks. However, if I have Brandon Cooks, I'm not trying to sell on him right now because there will be games where Brandon Cooks plays incredibly well. If you have any of the 3 Rams wide receivers, 1, 2, or 3, you're in a pretty good position. If you could get a good offer for Brandon Cooks after this game, maybe you take it. It was a decent game, 13.1 fantasy points, but I think the road gets even better for Brandon Cooks as the offense starts to figure itself out. It'll be interesting to see if this offense can sustain 4 people catching passes between our 3 wide receivers and Todd Gurley. But in previous years, they've been able to have 3 fantasy viable wide receivers, and I don't see why that's any different this year. All right, let's move on to another game of note. We'll try to go a little faster through this one. That is the Cleveland Browns bust-out game. The game when the Cleveland Browns finally played like the team we hoped they would play this entire year.
I'm guessing it's the game where State Farm threatened to pull Baker Mayfield's sponsorship, and he was like, oh, shoot, I'm supposed to play football.
Yeah, maybe. Baker Mayfield, speaking of him, played pretty well. He definitely, football-wise, had his best game of the season so far. Fantasy-wise, 15.8 points. It was a good game. But it brings up the question. Last week we were talking about Baker Mayfield, and we were like, you could probably drop him if there were other quarterbacks you'd rather pick up, like Daniel Jones, like Jacoby Brissett. After this game, he's more of a keep him if you want as like a matchup-dependent option. Just know that these next couple of games are probably not going to be too friendly to the young quarterback. Let me read you his upcoming schedule, Joe. We're at San Francisco.
Oh, it's going to go very well.
At San Francisco.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, a team that has been playing very well defensively so far. Then he's home to Seattle. Seattle's been kind of net 0. Kind of like they've been decent defense. So they'll apply some pressure, but they're also a very experienced defense. So that's an okay matchup. Then he's on a bye. Then he's at New England, the top defense right now. No. Then he's at Denver, who's been shutting down pass catchers and quarterbacks decently well.
Let me guess, he's playing the Lions next?
No, home against Buffalo, another really good defense.
Yeah.
That's not too pretty. for poor Baker Mayfield. So if you have him as a fantasy quarterback, there's few and far between where I'd feel comfortable starting him over whoever else you probably has as quarterback. Now, if Baker Mayfield was the first quarterback you drafted, and then your backup quarterback is someone who hasn't been performing as well, maybe someone who's been kind of inconsistent, maybe you had Baker Mayfield and Ben Roethlisberger, and you're just screwed right now.
Or maybe
you have no other option.
Newton.
But I would look for fill-in for Baker Mayfield, other options before I turn my head towards Baker Mayfield coming up. What were you going to say, Joe? I'm sorry.
I said maybe you picked up Scam Newton as well.
Scam Newton, injured. He'll be back eventually. We won't talk about him today because, quite frankly, there's not much to talk about. He came out recently that he would, on his YouTube channel, that he was like, I'm going to make sure I get better completely before. I'm not going to rush to come back. So Kyle Allen, still a decent quarterback to play. I put him more as a QB too. But Cam Newton, you've got some time before you got to start worrying about him. And he hasn't exactly been playing too well in the games he has played this season. So hopefully when he comes back, he does come back completely healthy. Let's go back to the Browns because we're going to go to the second player who had an amazing breakout game and the second highest fantasy point total this week. And that is running back Nick Chubb. Chubba-dub-dub. Rub-a-chub. Chubb. A good team name if you have Nick Chubb right now. I've personally named my team this before. Chubby Bunny. But that's not here what we're talking about. We're here to Chubba-tub-tub. We're here to talk about Nick Chubb, who scored 39.3 fantasy points this week off of 165 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And one of those touchdowns was an 88-yard rush where he found the open hole and just zoomed past the defense. It was beautiful. I looked it up. His top speed in that run was 21.95 miles per hour. So,
that's not legal in school zones.
No, it's not. Nick Chubb is illegal in school zones. Want to know what is also illegal involving Nick Chubb? Benching him. Nick Chubb will be a top 5 running back for the rest of the year. Period. I would put my favorite pair of shoes on that.
You do like betting your shoes an awful lot, David.
I do.
It feels like you don't really love those shoes.
I do like my shoes. Especially since my parents are listening. Guys, I like my shoes. Thank you very much for helping me.
There's a very high chance
purchase.
I walk away with those shoes at some point this semester.
Joe is not taking my shoes.
You bet those shoes.
Okay, I have bet my shoes a couple of times. But I still think Nick Chubb's going to be a top 5 running back because it's freaking Nick Chubb. I love Nick Chubb. I'm a big Nick Chubb supporter. I was a Nick Chubb supporter last year when he took over the starting position, and I am still a Nick Chubb supporter. Maybe it's the name. Maybe
it sounds like you got a Chubb for Nick Chubb right now.
Yep. Maybe it's because he's a beast. Enough said about Nick Chubb. He's great. He's been great even when the Browns weren't playing well, and now that they're playing well, he's even better. Let's go, Nick Chubb. Let's talk about a superstar who did not play as well, and that's Odell Beckham Jr. 4 fantasy points. 4 fantasy points.
Anyone who picked him up like 6th overall has got to be real pissed right now.
Yeah, in a game where the Cleveland Browns finally started playing well, OBJ was shut down. But you know what? That's okay. It's still Odell Beckham Jr. If the Browns play better, that's good for Odell Beckham Jr. You could try to buy low on him, see what offer you get from him. I would not sell on OBJ. I would still start him every week because what else would you do? It's Odell Beckham Jr. Listen, top players are going to have some down weeks. That's okay. The Browns have some couple tough matchups coming up, but maybe that means they depend even more on Odell Beckham Jr. I would temper your expectations for now, but in the future, I love him late this season. Let's talk about, after that rough stretch of games, here are some of the teams that the Cleveland Browns and Odell Beckham Jr. will play. This is starting from week 11, I believe. Week 11 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been not good. Except for this game against the Bengals, they've been an atrocious team so far. The Miami Dolphins, also a horrible team. Then Pittsburgh again. Then Cincinnati, another exploitable defense. Arizona, another exploitable defense. Baltimore, who, while typically aren't an exploitable defense, people have been throwing all over them this year, including the Browns. in this game, or in this most recent game where they played the Ravens. And then finally for Week 17, which may not matter for some fantasy leagues, they're back at Cincinnati. That has to be one of the best schedules for a wide receiver at the end of the year. So hold on to Odell Beckham Jr. A player that played well for the Browns wide receiving wise, while Odell wasn't playing well, is Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry had a very up game, 24.7 fantasy points, but he also got a concussion at the end of the game. It's still yet to be seen whether he will play this next week or not. If he doesn't play, luckily the Browns finally have some of their options coming back. Rashard Higgins coming back from a knee injury. Antonio Callaway coming back from suspension. I don't know that I would necessarily pick up either of them as a fill-in if Jarvis Landry is out, because like I said, they are playing San Francisco, but it is good to know that the Browns will have options. Jarvis Landry has been all right so far this season. Someone I personally did not expect to have a great season going into the year, because people who work alongside Odell Beckham Jr. typically don't see that many targets. Odell Beckham Jr. is a ball magnet, we'll say. But when Odell Beckham Jr. is getting shut down, Baker Mayfield has to throw to someone, and it was Jarvis Landry this week. And because he was able to produce this week, I think Jarvis Landry is able to produce in future weeks. This may be peak value for Jarvis Landry for a little bit against their tough games. Maybe if you have a losing record and you have Jarvis Landry, you might want to sell high on him so you can have a good player these next couple of weeks. But I'm a little more hopeful in Jarvis Landry after this game. I do believe that some of his points will persist throughout the reel. I think he's more real than fake, I guess, if that makes sense. All right. Let's go to the Ravens really quickly. Not too much to talk about. That game was more of a game to talk about the Browns. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson had 24.5. A decent day. Still set it, forget it for quarterback. You got to play him. Next game is at the Steelers. So, yeah, you like where that's heading. Mark Ingram had a down-to-earth game. 71 yards of rushing. Only 8.1 fantasy points this week. And you're getting pretty much what you drafted out of Mark Ingram. There's going to be days where he booms, and there's going to be days where he busts. He's an RB2 still, but he's inconsistent. Listen, that's just how it is. Unfortunately for some players, that's how the game script goes. That's how the player plays sometimes. Sometimes he gets a bunch of touchdowns. Some days he just gets 71 rushing yards. Oh well, what can you do? Also, the Browns played pretty well defensively, so... if you're a Mark Ingram owner, probably won't get great value for him after this week if you want to sell him. I wouldn't buy him after this week, really, unless you can get a good deal for him. It's just what it is. Let's move on to Marquise Hollywood Brown. Unfortunately, this is his second game in a row under 7 points after starting out great this year. Only 6.2 fantasy points. Still what he is before, boomer bust flex play. He's dependent on very big plays, and the Browns did not allow a lot of big plays this week. It's just what you got to expect out of Marquise Brown. One player who I expect to play better than he did this week, Mark Andrews, 4 for 31. That's 2 games in a row where he's kind of gone under expectations. But the nice thing is that he is still leading the Baltimore Ravens in targets. He still has the most targets out of any receiver, so wide receiver or tight end, out of anyone on the Baltimore Ravens. He got a touchdown this week. And once again, the tight end position is kind of shallow. So if you have Mark Andrews, he's like a mid-tier tight end 1. I was hoping for more out of him after he had some great weeks, but that's all right. I think his value will still go up. I doubt anyone's trying to sell on Mark Andrews right now, but maybe try to buy him. All right, that is enough for the Ravens. Those are some of the great games. We'll talk about some players who had terrible games in a second, but first, I'm going to pass the mic over to Joe Brown.
I am so excited that you did that because I have a very fun game for you today, David.
Oh, game show time!
I was thinking the other day,
as one typically does.
As one does, after going through the entire list of every single NFL player's names.
Oh, good God.
That that has nothing to do with names this time.
Oh, phew.
I was thinking about how fun it is to just sift through piles and piles of words and numbers. So I decided to look at some of the old veterans of the league that are still playing and see if I could find some rare gems hidden in their stats. And I have prepared some questions for you, David.
Uh-oh.
To see how well you know your NFL stats. So let's start off with the man himself, Tom Brady.
Tom Brady
is well into 20 years of playing in the NFL. We are talking about one of the most well-renowned quarterbacks to ever live, the GOAT.
The GOAT. Behind Aaron Rodgers.
But,
Go Pack,
David,
go.
how many career punts do you think Tom Brady has?
How many times has Tom Brady punted the ball?
In his 20-year career.
5.
You are overestimating my man's leg. Tom Brady has 2 career punts, both of which were at least 36 yards. I think one was 36, and I think the other was about 40. And both of which were downed within the 10-yard line. Because Bill Belichick created one of the greatest trick plays of all time, whereby if the Patriots were ever like deep behind the first down marker on third down, instead of risking a rush that would possibly injure Tom Brady and knowing that they weren't going to get the first down, they would do a shotgun snap to Tom Brady, who would quickly punt it to a backfield that did not have a receiver, on the hope that it would catch the other team off guard and they would be able to down it within the 10-yard line. And it worked both times.
Bill Belichick is a brilliant man.
But let's talk about Tom Brady's leg for a second. Those were both at least 36-yard punts, and they landed right where they were supposed to.
Tom Brady, as accurate of a punter as he is as a quarterback.
All right, so now I got a next one for you. Not someone who hasn't been in the league for as long, but let's talk about Julio Jones.
Julio Jones,
been playing for about 9 years now. He's definitely a veteran, still in his prime.
Wow.
He is a force to be reckoned with. A massive frame of a human being that runs like a smaller wide receiver, but definitely not someone you'd like to meet in the streets if he was ever upset with you. David, how many career tackles do you think Julio Jones has?
Career tackles? Oh, boy. All right. So I'm thinking, when would Julio Jones tackle someone? If Matt Ryan threw an interception, maybe he tackles the defensive player that caught it. Maybe he played special teams for a while. I'm going to guess 10.
Julio Jones, in his 9-year career, has had 16 tackles.
Wow.
There is one that you should definitely look up in a highlight reel where Matt Ryan throws an interception on the goal line, and it's intercepted by a linebacker who starts running it back, and around the 50-yard line, Julio Jones, this guy has cleared everyone. He is just gone for the end zone. No one in front of him. Julio Jones chases this man down like he was jogging and tackles him.
Wow.
Runs past every other person, and like after 40 yards just catches the dude and brings him down. That is the kind of tackling force you get from Julio Jones. Now, I would like to shift my attention away from receivers, and I would like to talk about the oldest old guy, Adam Vinatieri.
Kicker for
I like kickers.
Indianapolis Colts.
Adam Vinatieri, he's the oldest kicker there is. Looking at a 24-year career. He's been place kicked in New England for a very long time. Has been place kicking in Indianapolis. But how many career punts do you think Adam Vinatieri has?
Oh, wow. 8.
8 career punts. You might expect that from somebody who's on the special teams side of the ball, but surprisingly, he ties Tom Brady with only 2 career punts.
Wow. I see. I only imagine him punting when their actual punter's injured and they just want to give him
This is yo, Adam, get in here and punt the ball.
Yo, Adam. Yo, hey, Adam, punt this ball.
Adam Vinatieri is the kind of guy that you don't want to put in punting because you don't want to risk him getting hit.
Yeah.
As amazing a kicker as he is getting on there in age, and you do not want Adam Vinatieri to be injured. I would like to return to wide receivers because even crazier than Julio Jones, let's talk about Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald is, in my eyes, the GOAT in terms of how amazing of a human being he is, how consistent and awesome of a player he is. He's been playing for 17 years, and I'd like to ask you, David, how many tackles do you think Larry Fitzgerald has?
Larry Fitzgerald is a boss. And you said Julio Jones has 16 tackles?
Julio Jones has 16.
That means Larry Fitzgerald has 23. He has more tackles than Julio Jones.
You said that so tentatively as though you were ready for me to just completely shut you down, when in reality the answer is 39 tackles.
39!
Larry Fitzgerald has 39 tackles, and as a bonus fact, I'll throw in that he has thrown 2 completions, one of which was for a touchdown.
Larry Fitzgerald.
But
still the number 1 wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Especially with Christian Kirk a little banged up.
But, and for my final question, we're going to flip this, and instead of a wide receiver throwing touchdowns, I'm going to ask you, Drew Brees.
Drew Brees.
18-year career.
18 years.
One of the most consistent quarterbacks in the NFL. Right?
Yes, yes.
Quarterback for the New Orleans Saints.
A little bit of a home road split for Drew Brees, but that doesn't matter.
We're talking about a man with a quality throwing arm. You know, he's not the rushing kind of quarterback. He is the sit-back genius, kind of organize the offense, hitting those accurate throws quarterback. But in his 18-year career, how many receptions do you think Drew Brees has?
5.
8.
8,
and one of them was a touchdown.
Drew Brees, a renaissance man of football, catching balls for touchdowns, throwing them for touchdowns, winning a Super Bowl.
So at the end of this, I think we'd all learned the lesson that NFL players, as specific as they are in their task, are freak athletes, and you should never discount them from any statistic and from any position on the field.
Well said, Joe. Well said. I was unfortunately wrong a lot in that segment. And I'll tell you where I was also wrong a lot, and that is the Redskins versus Giants game. Last week I said, Case Keenum, he's a starting quarterback. It's against the Giants. He'll do amazing. Start him in your lineups if you need a quarterback to fill in. Joe, do you know how many points Case Keenum got?
I do not. Am I allowed to make a guess?
First I'll ask you, do you think it was over or under 5 points?
I hope it was at least 6 or 7 points.
No.
Oh,
now
dear.
I will ask you, do you think it was over or under 0 points?
Oh, no. Did he go negative?
Joe, he had 0.5 in the negative. He was negative 0.5 fantasy points. They pulled him from this game because of how terrible he was playing, and they threw in Dwayne Haskins, who did not play much better, but what can you expect out of a rookie receiver who just isn't ready yet? Sorry if you started Case Keenum. I'm very sorry. I did not, personally. I didn't heed my own advice because I didn't need to. So that's awkward.
It's surprising how poorly the Redskins are playing, like almost like they have bad luck, like they were cursed. It almost feels like their team name was built on an ancient Indian burial ground or something, and they've just been cursed to play horribly.
They're also cursed to play horribly because they're bad this year. But I think you're right, Joe. I think maybe they should rethink their name if they want to get rid of the curse. But we're not here to talk about whether or not the Redskins is an appropriate name for a football team. We're here to talk about if you should play Case Keenum in the future. No. Next question. All right. Case Keenum, up and down games. But after this game, where it was probably should have been one of his best games of the season, now they're talking about starting a different quarterback in his place. Case Keenum is completely droppable right now. If you have no better option than Case Keenum, God bless your soul. You have to find someone on the waiver wire. Even Gardner Minshew. He's been under 20 each week, but he's been consistent around 17 to 18 fantasy points each week. I'm sorry about that. Another player I was wrong about, but I'm less sorry about being wrong about, Wayne Gallman. I said, Wayne Gallman doesn't really inspire confidence. Wayne Gallman's like, bet, and scored 27.8 fantasy points. However, this was against the atrociously horrible Redskins. And with Saquon Barkley coming back soon, you're not going to get much value out of Wayne Gallman for much longer. Now, next week is at the Vikings, who are a decently good defense. Let's see what he does against a good team before we consider him, has to be in your lineup. But he's an interesting flex play this week. He still is the starting running back for a team, and there's only, I mean, there's less than 32 of those because obviously some teams go by committee. So your options are kind of limited in the running back position sometimes. So Wayne Gallman had a great game this week. We'll see if he has a great game next week. I don't expect him to be north of 15 points every week. Sorry, Wayne Gallman. All right. That brings up the question. Well, we'll talk about this later. Should you sell high on Wayne Gallman? Good luck now that we know that Saquon Barkley is coming back. But if you are a Saquon Barkley owner, if they're rushing Saquon Barkley back, you might want to have Wayne Gallman as a handcuff, because if they bring him back too fast, it could be possible that he just re-injures it again. And we don't want that.
Quick medical checkup. Ankle sprains are really, really easy to do again.
Yeah.
Once you get it once, my ankles don't feel the same that they used to. No matter how much work you put into healing it, just like an ACL tear, it's very viable to happen again. Because once you've stretched that tendon beyond where it wants to be stretched, it never quite heals properly. It's not as strong as it used to be. So he's going to put in a lot of work, but if they rush him back into the game, one bad hit and that ankle's sprained again.
That is the unfortunate truth of the NFL. Let's talk about their wide receivers. Sterling Shepard, 16.9 points. 7 catches for 76 yards and 23 rushing yards. Wide receiver 2 going forward. We knew he'd be good with Daniel Jones. Golden Tate's coming back, but I don't think that hurts Sterling Shepard. I think he'll still get the same target share that he's been getting so far. I think you're very happy now that Daniel Jones is a quarterback over Eli Manning. Now he went from like a flex play to a wide receiver 2. So Sterling Shepard, good game. We'll have good games going forward. Evan Ingram, an okay game, 9.4 fantasy points. I mean, you're a little worried because he didn't put that much up that many points against the Redskins. But Evan Ingram is one of their most talented players. He's a tight end, so you don't have many alternative options. I still like Evan Ingram going forward. Finally, Golden Tate. I see him as kind of a flex play in the future. Daniel Jones came back down to earth this week. Only 225 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Daniel Jones pretty much stays the same as like a bye week fill in. Maybe you play him matchup dependent quarterback, but he's not like your weekly starter. But I didn't expect Daniel Jones to be that. He had one great game last week. It's all about to see if he can repeat those good games, and he had a decent game this week. Golden Tate, back to him, because Daniel Jones came back to earth. He'll get decent targets, maybe a viable flex play some weeks, but I don't expect him to all of a sudden jump in and be a start every week guy for your fantasy team. And that's it for the game matchups I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about the week going forward. Joe, we're going to play a little game of buy low, sell high. Buy low, we're going to talk about some players, whether or not you should buy low on them, and whether or not you should sell high on some other players. And then we will get to everyone's favorite segment, guess the top 5 kickers.
Oh boy.
See if Joe Brown, our kicking master...
You would think I would have learned my lesson last time and actually prepared by looking them up in the meantime, but I didn't think you would actually do this again. I didn't think you would do this again after telling me after last podcast.
All right. Buy low candidates. Let's start with Tyreek Hill. Has been injured for the past couple of weeks. Coming back to the team where he'll be a wide receiver 1. He's practicing a little bit, but he's not necessarily ahead of schedule. We don't know when he'll be back. He's not really a buy low. This is the lowest maybe you'll be able to buy him for. Maybe you would have been able to buy him lower when he first had the injury. You'd have to give up a decent amount for Tyreek Hill. Should you buy low on Tyreek Hill?
I would say no. At this point in the season, you're going to have to give away more value than you really need to in order to get Tyreek Hill at this point, and giving up 2 or 3 solid players just to get Tyreek Hill, especially in how deep of an offense the Chiefs are running right now. Patty Mahomes has targets upon targets. Mm-hmm. We're not going to argue that Tyreek Hill isn't going to be his number 1 target, but Tyreek Hill is not going to be getting the playing quality that you really want out of a wide receiver 1, because, Sammy Watkins exists. Patrick Mahomes is hitting Travis Kelce like crazy, and he's got like 3 other running backs and wide receivers. Like Patrick Mahomes can put the ball in the hands of whoever he wants. He does not need Tyreek Hill, and I would not say Tyreek Hill is worth how much you'd have to give for him at this point.
I agree with Joe. They seem to be spreading the ball around a lot this year. If you're a Tyreek Hill owner, obviously when he comes back, you're starting him. It's still the Chiefs' offense. They're amazing, and there's a lot of fantasy points to be had there. But unless you get a good deal, I agree with Joe that you'd probably have to give up too much to get Tyreek Hill right now. He would not be a buy low. He would be a buy medium. I mean, it's Tyreek Hill. We know what he can do. He's a name everyone knows right now. You're not going to be able to get him for a good price. Let's talk about DJ Chark, who was on the waivers last week, despite having some great games behind his back. And then this week, he had kind of an okay game, I think under 10 fantasy points. Would you buy low on DJ Chark? Can I answer this one?
Yeah, you can go for that one.
Yes. Get DJ Chark in your lineup. Okay, don't give up too much to get him. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars. They won't throw as much this year. But DJ Chark still leading the Jaguars in receptions. They finally have Leonard Fournette going well. Leonard Fournette had 225 rushing yards this week, which means the offense will be more diversified. They'll be able to throw the ball more. And DJ Chark would have had a touchdown last week if it wasn't called back because of a holding call. DJ Chark is legitimate. I like DJ Chark. Try to get him with your lineups if you can. Don't give up too much for him. He's still only a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 going forward. But, I mean, buy low on DJ Chark. Joe has a specific trade offer right now. It's a bit of a weird scenario, one where I would not take DJ Chark. Why don't you talk about it?
I drafted AJ Green somewhere around 5th or 6th round. AJ Green, for those of you who don't know, like always, is injured, but I'm waiting for him to come back. Should be the next couple weeks, and he is a quality boom wide receiver. Definitely the extra oomph that I want to throw onto my team going into the playoffs. And I have been offered DJ Chark and Wayne Galdman for AJ Green, which is an interesting offer, mainly because Galdman is not going to be giving up that much value after the next couple weeks. And because DJ Chark has, as amazing as he is a wide receiver 2 option, if I'm trading him for a solid wide receiver 1, he has been losing value as the season progresses. And I am just concerned about the potential value lost at giving up a wide receiver who is going to be the powerhouse of his offense when he comes back, as opposed to a wide receiver who his best points for this season might be behind him.
A very good point. All right, we're going to talk about 3 big name wide receivers kind of quickly right now because we're running low on time. Julian Edelman, DeAndre Hopkins, and Juju Smith-Schuster. All 3 have had down games this week. There's one where I think you won't be able to buy him for low enough price. That's DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to sell their number 1 wide receiver pick. He had a down game, but if you have DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, obviously keep him. He's DeAndre Hopkins. Too talented of a player to have this point total for the rest of the season. If you're trying to, now would be the time to buy low on DeAndre Hopkins, but good luck. The receiver I would try to buy low on, Julian Edelman. He had a bad game this week, but it was against the Buffalo Bills, a very good defense. And now that Antonio Brown is out of the picture, Julian Edelman is the clear number 1 wide receiver in New England. And Tom Brady trusts Julian Edelman. Julian Edelman was the Super Bowl MVP, I believe, last year. So, yeah, try to buy low on Julian Edelman right now. Finally, Juju Smith-Schuster. I would not buy low on Juju Smith-Schuster. He's still a very talented wide receiver, and he will do better than he did this week. But I'm worried about that offense. Against the Bengals, despite them playing very well, they had to rely on these kind of trick plays where they would hike the ball to the backup running back, Jalen Samuels, who would then do a dinky little toss to James Conner, technically counted as a reception, but they're resorting to very short plays. And Juju Smith-Schuster is the guy who is always a threat because he could beat the defense in the backfield. He would outrun them, catch the ball, run it in for a touchdown, make these big plays. I'm not saying that Juju Smith-Schuster will not get any targets, but I don't know. if he, for the rest of the season, I don't know if he's a wide receiver 1. I bet he ends the season outside of the top 15 wide receivers.
I mean, let's be honest here. Juju Smith-Schuster's main value has always come from the deep plays, and he's used to having one of the most powerful arms in the NFL tossing him passes deep.
Big Ben.
And Big Ben not being there has definitely cut his value quite a bit. Not just because they have a less experienced quarterback, but just because they're not doing those deep throws anymore. And if you watch Juju's highlight reel, you know where his fantasy points are coming from. Just straight routes down the middle of the field, and Big Ben puts it in the exact right spot, and now you've got a reception and 70 yards, possibly a touchdown. That's where Juju Smith's value came from. And with Big Ben out of the picture, it's just not happening like that anymore.
Yep. All right, sell high time. And the first name that someone asked me about sell high is Chris Godwin. Should I sell high on Chris Godwin after leading the league in points this week? No. For everything we talked about before on this podcast, don't sell high on Chris Godwin. Unless you can get, even if you got DeAndre Hopkins for him, I don't know. Chris Godwin Chris Godwin for DeAndre Hopkins, maybe I would take that.
Right, but who would make that trade?
Who would make that trade? Chris Godwin has been awesome. He will continue to be awesome. End of story. Other players to sell high on. Should you sell high on Leonard Fournette, who is yet to find the end zone this year, but just ran for 225 yards?
No, absolutely not.
Agreed.
If he can put up that much points without hitting the end zone, you should never drop him off of your roster. Because when he does hit the end zone, you're going to be looking at points up into the 30s.
Yes, he's been a very efficient running back this year. All right, let's wrap this up pretty quickly. We're going to come to the end here pretty soon. One player I do think you should sell high on, I'm just going to name one or two. Allen Robinson, if you can, for the Bears. I would try to get a more consistent receiver. I don't like the Bears right now. I think they're going downhill. And Jordan Howard. If you can sell high on Jordan Howard for the Philadelphia Eagles, I would do so because he is at peak value after a game where he had 3 touchdowns. All right, we're going to wrap this up right now. Our time has unfortunately run out. We do not unfortunately have time. You know what? Let's really quickly. Joe, can you name what teams you think the top 5 kickers are from?
I know Kansas City's kicker is in the top 5. I would imagine Panthers kicker is still in the top 5. I know the Rams kicker is still in the top 5. I know Zane Gonzalez isn't anymore, so then my next guess would be, I think, I'm going to go with the Buccaneers kicker and then the Houston kicker.
4 out of 5 right.
Dang it.
Really close. Not the Houston kicker, it's the New Orleans kicker.
No,
So-
it's still Will Lutz.
Yeah, so it's Carolina, followed by LA Rams, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Kansas City. All right, thank you everyone for tuning in to Touchdown with Hansen and Brown. We will be back next week at the same time, 6 till 7. Until that time, good luck in fantasy football. Don't start Case Keenum. And do not sell high on beautiful, beautiful Chris Godwin. We had one question from a fan submitted this week. Unfortunately, we are not able to answer it because we've run out of time. His question, or talk about it too deeply. His question was between Melvin Gordon, Juju Smith-Schuster, and one other wide receiver. Who should he sit? Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati Bengals. Don't sit Melvin Gordon. I guess start Juju over Tyler Boyd. Both of them have decent matchups coming up. Both of them have had bad quarterback play. I like Juju just because his ceiling is higher than Tyler Boyd's, but Tyler Boyd has been playing more consistent this year. Up to you. But those two are kind of in the similar pocket for me. Probably, I guess I would pick Tyler Boyd. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week. Sayonara.